I sometimes look back and don't even recognize my previous life. It was a true sort of death and rebirth, and it is almost impossible for me to sort of relate to that. And I have to do that daily. I have to remember that that was just 6 years ago. And I have pictures actually that are amazing from a wedding that I was the best man at 7 years ago. And boy, I looked like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, you know. And I remember feeling so insecure. And what I realized was that deep insecurity, that imposter syndrome, even though I've had a few accomplishments in my life, I always felt like I was, someone was going to find me out. And I realized afterwards that what they were going to find out was that I was an addict.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Jason Earle with us. Jason is a man on a mission, an adoring father of 2 boys in diapers, incurable entrepreneur and indoor air quality crusader. He is the founder and CEO of Got Mold and the creator of the Got Mold test kit. The realization that his moldy childhood home was the underlying cause of his extreme allergies and asthma led him into the healthy home business in 2002, leaving behind a successful career on Wall Street. Over the last 2 decades, Jason has personally performed countless sick building investigations, solving many medical mysteries along the way, and helping thousands of families recover their health and peace of mind. He's been featured or appeared on Good Morning America, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, The Dr. Oz Show, Entrepreneur, Wired, and more. Jason, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's so good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So we got to start with a fun synchronicity. I remember this from when we had our first call. You'd mentioned, strange coincidence. Well, I know there are no coincidences, but you had just a few minutes earlier been listening to Tucker Max, and I think it was Dan Sullivan having a conversation on a podcast. And out of nowhere, I don't even know if it was a business podcast. It might have been just like about how to write a memoir or something. Tucker, out of the blue, right before our call, mentions, if you're going to write, let's say a memoir, no problem. Like, you're the star of the show. You can only talk about you and no one else can in the way you can. But if you're going to write a book about, let's say, SEO, well, you're going head to head with Stephan Spencer in this huge book, The Art of SEO. And of course, we were talking about SEO on that call, and it was just out of the blue. And you're like, strange coincidence. Do you remember that?
I do. Thank you. Actually, I did not recall it until you brought it back, but boy, I do now. And that was, I look at those as breadcrumbs, Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. That certainly. And I'm glad to see that our trail has brought us back here.
Well, there are no random occurrences. It's all orchestrated. And I just love when things that just seem so crazy or out of the blue like that happen, and they happen with regularity. That's when you know you're on the path, right? The more benevolent you are, the more synchronicities you get. The more synchronicities you get, hopefully the more benevolent you become, and it keeps being this self-reinforcing virtuous loop. More synchronicities, more benevolence, more synchronicities, even more benevolence, etc.
That's right. That's right. No, I love that. Yeah, I think about it as integrity. Benevolence and integrity are kissing cousins, but the idea of being integrated, in integrity, not as honesty, but integrity as being integrated, so your thoughts, words, actions, belief, all of that stuff is in harmony. And I believe that when you are in harmony, then you resonate with the universe, and then these things happen with remarkable regularity.
Yeah. It also reminds me of coherence. When your heart and brain are in coherence, then you get in this kind of parasympathetic state of flow and intentionality and purpose and connection. It's amazing.
Indeed. Yes, it's and I've lived in both in integrity and out of integrity, so I'm very familiar.
As we all have.
Yeah, I've got the experiential data, at least, to say with great confidence that is a path to happiness and peace of mind.
Yeah, and it's all perfect. Even when you're out of integrity, it provides the contrast that helps you to choose what you prefer. Because if you don't have that sense of contrast, you don't really appreciate the value of what you're getting just by default. Like, oh, every day is sunny. Well, I don't really appreciate it as much as if I have a terrible rainstorm the day before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is really, yeah, I don't believe that we're ever really truly making mistakes. I think that we're just, potentially delaying the lesson, delaying the learnings. Um, but especially if we're making the same mistake over and over again, but at the end of the day, they're all learnings. Everything is a blessing. This is at least that's been my experience so far.
It's funny you say that, because one of the most profound things I heard from this particular rabbi, I went to a Shabbat dinner with him at his home, I don't know, 2 years ago. And his passing comment as we were leaving and he was saying goodbye to us was, just remember, in Judaism, everything is a blessing.
Mm,
And whether it's a revealed blessing or an unrevealed blessing, that's the question. If it's a real revealed blessing, that's obvious to it. But if it's unrevealed, not yet revealed, then we see it as a challenge or a misfortune. But of course, it's not. You have to zoom out far enough and then you see the blessing in it. And so if you want more blessings, be more precise in your requests of the Creator in your prayers. Ask for more revealed blessings.
mm, I love that. I love that. Yeah. Gifts don't have to be wrapped in pretty paper, right? And in fact, the greatest gifts of my life have been served unwrapped in many cases, or wrapped in paper that would have probably caused most people to reject them, right? Like, thanks, but no thanks. But and it's hard to remember that in the moment. I would say that that's one of the greatest challenges, that we forget these things when we're in pain. We forget these things when someone that we love is in pain. Um, and it takes time to gather that perspective, because then in retrospect, you look at it and you go, of course.
Yep. Well, I see it as a muscle that you've got to work. And when you do all the prep work ahead of time and you keep at it, then it makes it a lot easier to remember God and your mission and the bigger picture as you're going through the challenge, versus if you don't have that um, that emotional fitness that you've been working on, that spiritual fitness of trying to stay in both worlds at the same time all the time. Right. So I'll do things that sound maybe ridiculous to some folks, but in the middle of a conversation or in the middle of a workout at the gym with my trainer, or uh, whatever it is, I might just wave to God in my mind. I kind of think of a wave emoji, and I get one back, and I just feel like I need to maintain that connection with the Creator, so that that's basically what I'm here for, is to cleave to God. And if I am just firing on all cylinders in other aspects of my life, and I'm neglecting that spiritual aspect of my life, I'm failing it. I'm missing the point. I'm missing the plot.
Indeed. And that's when I find that I'm out of resonance, right? When things just don't seem to be kind of working.
Yeah.
I can go back and do a little inventory, and just go, I haven't been meditating. I haven't been consciously having contact with my higher power, or the universe, or however you want to frame it. Um, and it's a prescription for me, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just that sort of daily multivitamin that's and again, you start to go, oh well, no, it's just that simple thing, and it takes so little time. It just takes consciousness, awareness, right,
Mm-hmm.
and consistency.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have this. I mean, this is not the way I expected our call or our podcast to begin, but I'm so grateful to connect with you on these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I remember.
I said this before we started recording, but I just I allow the episode to unfold the way it's meant to, and I trust that I'm going to be given the questions and the prompts and the kind of direction as it goes along. I just let go and let God.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. It's beautiful.
So
And I
let's
really enjoy
start with
your other shows too, by the way. Having a chance to listen to some of your work. I've enjoyed your SEO work and things I've read that you've written, but your interviews really hit home. So
Oh,
I'm
thank
grateful to
you.
be here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we were talking about the James Goulden episode that you just recently listened to. Yeah. Love that guy. Incredible story. And wow, what he went through and how he came out the other side. He almost didn't. He almost didn't. But of course, it's all meant to be. And if you're meant to stay on this planet, some miracle will happen so that you can make it.
Truly, and then to be an example for others, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we're all blessing each other in these ways, right?
Yeah.
To give hope, and to just cast a little light, a little more
Yeah.
light.
And the funny thing that Joe Polish sometimes says is that sometimes a person's in your life just to be a bad example.
Oh yeah, I've got a whole host of those,
Yeah,
and those are gifts too, man. I
that's
mean,
right.
in my history, those are some of the most potent gifts. Because I refer back to them often.
Hmm.
They're those are unforgettable.
Yeah. And the funny thing is if you look back at it fondly and know that this was just a complete setup for your highest and best good, then you can look at these folks who were villains in that part of your story and see them as the actor that's behind the role and love that actor, love that soul, and still not necessarily condone the bad behavior, but still see the beauty and the grace of it all.
No doubt about it. It's funny that you bring that up because I've had a series of awakenings over the years, but about 5.5 years ago, I quit drinking, and I was experiencing, and it was very necessary for lots of different reasons. Not the least of which is that my family history is riddled with alcoholism, and it's something I knew I needed to avoid, but it got its grips on me, and it took me a while to shake it. But in the end, the buoyancy that came from that, friends who've been through it said, that's a pink cloud, that you'll come back down to earth. But I didn't. I maintained this incredible buoyancy as if I had survived a terminal illness. And I realized in retrospect I did. And then I somehow or another, I stumbled upon a story about someone who in fact had survived the terminal illness and then later had a near death experience, died flatlined, um, clinically dead for 15 minutes, and came back with this incredible story about flying through this valley on the wing of a butterfly and meeting a woman who introduced herself as his sister, that he did not know he had, and then gave him all this wisdom about his history and his life, and explained to him that there are no mistakes and that there are truly no sins, and that in fact you create this life in advance, and you agree to these dynamics, to teach you how to learn how to love and to overcome fear. And boy, that hit me so hard. Even telling it now, it gets me all misty eyed. And I began going down this rabbit hole of near death experience videos on YouTube, and it's
I've done that. Yep. Yep.
it's a guilty pleasure. But I'll tell you, it's illuminating. And if you want to have a religion, take the religion out of the religion. You watch 100 of those, and you will come together with an idea about the way the universe works,
Yeah.
or at least the way our universe, this experience, it works, because the consistencies are remarkable. And I've read a number of books about this now, and I look at everyone now with a much more grateful eye. They say love your enemy, you know,
Mhm.
and that's where that comes from.
Yep.
Because there are no enemies here.
Yep.
The perpetrator and the victim will trade roles at some point, probably, and ultimately it's so that we can learn love and forgiveness. And if that doesn't make the world a better place, nothing will. But that's
Yeah.
why we have so much pain and difficulty, and at least this is the explanation of these people who come back with these experiences, is that this is intentionally hard. This is like a spiritual gym. you know,
The,
and we
the,
need
the
this
hardest
contrast.
school is Earth School.
Earth School. Earth
Yeah.
School. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. So that has, I always had this innate feeling that no adversity should be wasted, and that it's the overcoming. Everybody loves that story, right? We watch movies about this. Everybody loves that second act, that person who maybe started off strong, or maybe started off, and then they rise from the ashes, especially if they crash really hard. That's always really inspiring, because cleaning up the wreckage is a daunting prospect. But then to see someone rise again in a way where they've been, purified of sorts, leaving behind the stuff that doesn't matter, and refocusing on the things that do service to others, contribution to the greater good, focusing on love and gratitude and overcoming fear and, and those kinds of things. See, that's also a very common dynamic with people who rise from the ashes, right? Because it is a purification. It's almost alchemical, right?
Mm-hmm.
To,
It's all
to
spiritual
dump that.
refinement.
Indeed. Yeah. And it's heat and pressure, right? It's the same way you take diamonds and or take coal and turn them into diamonds, or, or the way you temper steel or glass, right? It's always heat and pressure. And so, we are physical matter here to a degree, at least the shell that we're operating in. And so why would we be an exception? Heat and pressure are what purifies and refines us, as well as strengthens us. So
yes, we're forged in the crucible.
No doubt, no doubt. These allegories have truth on many levels.
Yeah, amazing. There's a great book, a children's book that I don't know if you've heard of before, but I think it's pertinent to our conversation right now, and it's called The Little Soul in the Sun. I've recommended it before to my listeners, but I'm going to recommend it specifically to you, Jason, for your little ones and for you, because I think it'll really resonate. It's by Neil Donald Walsh, who also wrote Conversations with God.
Familiar.
And it's just this beautiful allegory or story of how each of us comes into this incarnation in in soul contracts where we are agreeing to be the villain in somebody's life and vice versa, and please don't forget who I really am, because I will have forgotten, and I'm doing you this favor so that you can learn how to be forgiving, or how to be unconditionally loving, or whatever the thing is that you want to really experience being. It's easy to forgive somebody for accidentally bumping you in the grocery store, but it's a lot harder for somebody who betrays. If you're betrayed, or somebody embezzles from you or assaults you, to forgive them. So souls will volunteer to do these terrible things to help us on our path and that spiritual refinement. So it's a really beautiful little children's book, and it's got such powerful lessons that correlate to, of course, the bigger book, the Conversations with God book.
I love that. I think about when children die at a young age, or, there's some beautiful stories about people who, got into a car accident and survived, and their family died. They were driving and they caused the accident. And they later have that experience where they're told by their wife or children who died in the accident, they meet them during their brief NDE, and they're told.
I think I saw that that one.
The guy who flipped his car, he was asleep, and
he was looking, or maybe this is a different one, but this guy, he just looked at his phone just for a short period of time, and then when he looked up, head-on collision, and then he finds out, and of course everyone, his whole family dies, and he finds out in his NDE that this was already written. This was soul contracts all made before incarnating with all those family members, that this is what's going to happen. It's like, wow.
He'd asked for it so that he could learn to love deeper through loss.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So, that's both beautiful and daunting, because you go, oh, I get why I'm here, but shit, I really don't want to do that.
Yeah. Can I just have an easy life? I just want to skate through this one.
Well, it also, easy life, easy decisions, hard life, hard decisions, easy life. Like you look back, and I think that, when we get to the other side of this, we'll be high-fiving for the ones who took the greatest risks in these regards. And, you'll say you lived a great life if you really threw yourself into it, and you took those heavy weights, those heavy experiences, and assimilated them and then turned them into beauty, So again, easier said than done, right?
Yeah. But that reminds me of Marianne Williamson and her amazing quote: "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are more powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us." We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. And I just think this is what is really scary, to step into our greatness, not to be facing head on a horrible, difficult challenge, seemingly horrible, but of course a blessing in disguise. But it's that oh my goodness, who am I to be gorgeous, talented, fabulous, brilliant, a force for good in the world, and someone that's speaking on stages or getting interviewed on Good Morning America or whatever. Who are you not to be? Because that's what you're here for, is to be a light in this world.
That's right. Well, it's a scary prospect. It's hard. It's hard to put those things down, right? Tall poppy syndrome. You know, there are so many things that keep you from that appear to keep you from doing that. Why do you go back to revert to bad habits, right? Why do we, find comfort in things that are actually really uncomfortable, addictions and things like that? Because because sometimes the light is just too damn bright, and and so you turn away from it, and it's that's one of the baffling things about um bad habits, addictions, and by the way, and I've learned from experience, everybody's got something, right?
Mm-hmm.
It shows up with some people: alcohol, food, drugs, sex, whatever, but everybody's got a repetitive behavior or repetitive thought process that causes them dismay, and that they struggle with in their quiet moments. And so I've learned to develop a lot of compassion, because I believe everybody's suffering. That's the human condition. And I think that that's what keeps us, that leans us away from the light. And then it's our job to keep, putting effort towards going back. And that's the daily thing. It's just like gravity, right? We have to stand up and work against something every day. Plants work against something every day. Gravity, right? Leaning towards the light. And so the question is, do you give to the gravity, or do you lean to the light? And that's the moment to moment, day to day, year to year practice that allows you to get stronger, just like that tree that grows on a cliffside, right? You take a seed and plant it in a pot of fertile soil and grow that tree in a greenhouse. Perfect conditions, light, the right amount of nutrients, and you've just got all of the humidity and the whole thing, and you curate this experience, and it grows tall and spindly, and then you open up the window, one wind comes through, and the thing falls down, right? You take that same seed, same DNA, and that grows on a cliffside where it's just got all these elements just crashing against it, like that, you'd see, like almost like a bonsai tree coming out of the mountain, right, or out of the side of the cliff, and you see that gnarly character come out of it. That's just, and it's so strong and rugged, and it's got this inherent beauty in it. That seed that was grown in a greenhouse just doesn't have. It's got inherent beauty because it's nature, and it's creation of the universe, but it doesn't have that character that we all admire so much, and we see that in people too. Mm-hmm. And so why we want to live more like that seed, and this is how we live now, helicopter parenting, all this stuff, wrapping our kids in bubble wrap, and want to protect them from all the adversity. I'd rather be that tree on the cliff. I certainly want my kids to be that tree on the cliff. I don't want them to suffer unnecessarily, but I do want them to suffer necessarily.
Yeah. Reminds me of something I did a long time ago in New Zealand. It's called a zorb ball. Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm. I love those things. They're hilarious.
Yeah. So for the listener who doesn't know what it is, it's this huge plastic ball, transparent. You get inside, and you can either have some water in there, or it could be completely dry. If it's dry, then you are bounced around and tumbled around like you're in a washing machine or something. But if there's some water in there and you got like a bathing suit on, you'll just slip through, and then they'll push you down a hill. It's like, I don't want to live my life where I'm inside a zorb ball and it's all cushy and comfortable, and I'm not going to get scratched or bruised or anything. I want to live a full life and have, being fully used up by the end of it. Just not still in my shrink wrap packaging at the end of it all. So
That's a wasted life. I agree.
Yeah.
I could
Have you
not
been in
agree
a
more.
Zorb ball before?
No, I haven't, but I really can't wait to go down to New Zealand and Australia for lots of reasons. But that's one of the main reasons, actually. I don't know that they do that here. I have a feeling U.S. Regulate insurance and regulations. I mean, we have a bubble wrap society here,
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that would fly here. Although it might be a good business opportunity. Maybe you and I should talk about that offline.
Oh, funny. Yep. Yep. Okay, so let's talk about some of your adversities, because you are a graduate in the University of Adversity. You shared how powerful adversity is before we started recording, in shaping and making you who you are. And you lost your mom, and I'll let you share that story as much as
Sure.
you want to disclose about that. You experienced toxic mold exposure and Lyme disease and gut dysbiosis and so forth. You had some real harrowing moments there that somehow you managed to, to get through and thrive despite of, or maybe in part because of. And I'd love for you to share some of that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, I actually really think that it was all absolutely necessary. And so I look at these all as gifts. In the moment, like I said before, not so easy to have that perspective. But so going back to when I was about 4 years old, I lost a lot of weight in a 3-week period, and my parents were concerned. Of course, they took me to the pediatrician, who said, "Yeah, no, you need to take him to the children's hospital. This looks serious." I was having difficulty breathing, and I was having reactions to seemingly everything. And so the initial diagnosis, based upon my family history as well as the symptoms that I was presenting with, was cystic fibrosis, and that was a death sentence back then. My father was particularly hit by this. In fact, they were both very concerned because it's a genetic disease on my father's side. My father lost 4 of his cousins to CF before the age of 14. So they spent the next 6 weeks crying while they waited for a second opinion, which thankfully contradicted the first diagnosis. I actually had asthma compounded by pneumonia, and I was allergic to every single thing they tested me for. So they put you in a papoose, kind of like a straitjacket for toddlers, and with an exposed back, and they draw this grid. They apply the antigens on your back. My dad said I looked like a ladybug with just a big red swollen back with dots
Oh,
all over it.
that sounds like torture. Yeesh.
Yeah, no, and so I had an itchy childhood. A lot of it showed up as dermal sensitivities, but I also had asthma, and so I lived on inhalers, and they weren't even like really good inhalers back then. There was like a breathy, it was like a powder that you had to inhale. It was bizarre, and so. And I grew up on this non-working farm where it was basically an animal adoption facility. So I was surrounded by all the things I was allergic to: grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, cotton, soybeans. I farm, fields as far as you could see, and all these critters. And my parents had a really interesting idea about hygiene. I would actually call it logene. And so there was very little care for these things. Our dogs and cats used the basement as a litter box half the time. It's very dysfunctional. Alcoholics, and both of them alcoholics, and my family tree, the roots run deep into bourbon barrels, really. And so I essentially lived like that until I was about 12, at which point my folks split up, which was a blessing for everyone. And I moved out of that musty old farmhouse, and all of my symptoms went away. I never had to use an inhaler again. I am no longer allergic to anything. And so it was chalked up to what they call spontaneous adolescent remission, which is a fancy way of saying they don't know what the hell happened. But my grandfather had grown out of his asthma, so they just said, well, just like that. And so I didn't think about it again for over a decade. But 2 years later, my mother committed suicide in that same house. She stayed behind. I moved in with my father when my folks split up, and which is actually relevant to the mold side of the story, which we can get into if we have time. And And then a year later, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. Still don't know if I really had it, actually. I had symptoms, but Lyme was very difficult to diagnose back then, and a lot of false negative. There's a lot of false negatives, and there still are. But the treatment for it was so heavy-handed because it was early, and my doctor was fairly experimental, and it was 30 pills a day for 3 days, and then off. So it was pulse therapy, and it resulted in me being sick so much that between my mother's death and Lyme, I ended up being effectively forced to drop out of school. Now, I wasn't really a big fan of school anyway. I like to learn. I don't like to be force fed. And so it did not tickle my curiosity being there. So the only regret that I have about not dropping out of school was that I didn't do it earlier. But basically they came to me and said, it's you're gonna have to stick around for the rest of the year and then come back again because you've missed so much school. And I said, well, yeah, no, that's not gonna work. So I had my father sign me out. And to his credit, he said, so what do you? We're walking out of the school, and he said, so what are you doing today? I said, I'm going home with you. And he goes, like, hell, you are going to work. You're a man now, So I walked to the gas station where I was working part-time, and I told the owner that I had just dropped out and I needed full-time hours. She said, well, great, I got another loser. And I was like, well, no, let me tell you the story. So I want to save money, get my GED, start college a year early. And so she embraced that, and I started full-time there. And within a few months, I met a guy who came in with a flat tire in his BMW. And it's a story it's a fairy tale, but we struck up a conversation, and he ended up recruiting me to come work for him on Wall Street. I was 16, I had nothing going. I mean, that usually that story usually ends at the gas station, and it's really where a big part of my story begins. But so he recruited me, and I ended up going to the train station was right next to the gas station in my town. So it was a commuter town, and so I ended up commuting with him. And within a year, I had gotten my Series 7 stockbroker's license at the age of 17, which unknowingly made me the youngest licensed stockbroker in history. And so
That's amazing.
Total, I mean, accidental, right? I was like the least likely to be a Wall Street whiz kid, right? Like, and so it was, but I ended up really taking to it well. But, it was interesting there on the commutes to the city, I would, because I had no money, I would eat, a bagel or, a Knish or these high carb, processed things. And I would have these out of body experiences. Really brain fog, like cubed. I would literally just feel like I was disconnected from my body, and it took me a while to figure it out. But it was, because of my gut had been so wiped out from the Lyme disease, from the treatment for Lyme disease, from the antibiotics, that I was effectively fermenting. I was probably like a distillery in my gut, just producing probably a lot of alcohols, quite frankly, VOCs for sure, microbial VOCs, and so when I kind of connected the dots on that, I started eliminating those foods, and suddenly my brain came back, and I started my skin got better, and my fatigue was non-existent. I got this energy back, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I had embraced a ketogenic diet, something that 30 years ago very few people were talking about, and even fewer were doing, except for epilepsy treatment, for example. I mean, Dr. Atkins was talking about it, but he was talking about something that was a little bit cruder than what I was doing. So that got me to the place where I could actually be really effective on Wall Street and as a stockbroker, and making 400 phone calls a day and looking for one guy to say yes. That was the key to success. Failing 99.75% of the time was the key to success. And so it was true persistence training. And I did that for 9 years. I ended up owning my own firm for 2 years at the end. And then the dot-com bubble burst, and I became really disenchanted with what I was doing and felt like it was an asset class that I didn't really believe in for the time being. And so I decided to go on walkabout. Meanwhile, my drinking had accelerated quite a bit, because on Wall Street, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. And so work hard, play hard is the motto there. And so I went on walkabout. And while I was away, I was reading a story about a man who had developed adult onset asthma and allergies to all these things that he never had a problem with before. And suddenly I had this deja vu moment, right? I'm like a time machine. I'm back to my childhood, and I'm thinking, geez, I wonder if we had a mold problem at Old Trenton Road. So I called my dad from a payphone and asked him, I said, do you think we had mold? And he's like, yeah, of course. We had mushrooms in the basement. Why do you ask? And I thought, man, like 70s parents, right? They're like, ah, you don't need seatbelts. Like it was just a very different mentality. And so I said, well, do you think that's what made me sick? And he goes, well, it couldn't have helped. So that was all I needed to hear. And I became fascinated, captivated, obsessed, even really, with the idea that the buildings we live and work in can make you sick. That was a new concept for me. And it is a new concept for many people, although fewer and fewer, thankfully. This awareness has really gained some momentum in the last 20 years. That was 21 years ago, by the way. And so I got into this space back when it was very nascent. And I ended up on the remediation side to earn a little while I learned, doing sales for a large remediation company. And I ended up hearing about a guy who trained mold sniffing dogs to find a hidden mold in buildings. And I thought, wow, that's just crazy enough to be brilliant. So let me check this out. Went down to Florida, met the guy, met the dog, and came back with the dog. I was not expecting that. My family thought I was crazy. Here, the youngest licensed broker in history has a mold sniffing dog, right? They thought I'd lost my mind.
You came back with the dog.
I came back with a $14,300 lightly used dog. He only used dogs that were on doggy death row. And mine had gone to doggy death row twice because she really needed a job to stay out of trouble. So he put her to work, and so I came back with a mold sniffing dog, and we hit the ground running, and we got some really early. And we actually had Channel 6 Action News tried to debunk us, so they sent a consumer alert division out, and they hid mold in the house. And instead of debunking us, we found the mold in like 3 minutes. And so they endorsed us, and I didn't even have an LLC set up. I didn't. It was just like this avalanche suddenly came with local doctors, with problem patients, and all these people. And so the stories of healing are what led to the Good Morning America episodes and all the press. I've got boxes and boxes of books and magazines. We never had to pay for any advertising. And we called the company Lab Results because we did laboratory testing and we used Labrador retrievers, and we thought that was cute.
Oh, that is cute.
Yeah. And so I did that with Oreo. I did that for about 15 years. That company became 1-800-GOT-MOLD. And so through that, we were able to help many thousands of people. And then in recent years, I became again, another sense of disenchantment, right? So like, sort of like the death and rebirth process. I became very disenchanted with the idea that I was primarily serving the affluent. And I was also facing the fact that my drinking had gotten bad on Wall Street was actually getting worse. And I gained a lot of weight. Here I am selling health and helping people with health. And I'm not living that, I'm actually living a double life, talking about how they can do things to improve their quality of life. And then also then drinking daily, to excess. It was a cycle that was clearly, going nowhere fast. And so I ended up deciding to make a whole bunch of changes. And so one of the things was to really focus on creating equity in this indoor air quality space. And so I decided that we needed to find a way to make high quality data accessible to everyone. So it led me on a mission to create a high quality do-it-yourself home test kit so that I wouldn't just be serving the affluent. I was making rich people healthier, but many people we had to turn away. I mean, we had to turn away 80% of the people who called us for our inspection business because they were either outside of our coverage area or they couldn't afford a simple inspection. And that broke my heart. My own parents could not have afforded to hire my company. And so here I am creating a company to help families navigate something that we went through. And yet I was actually truly making it a business that was benefiting me and the affluent people who could. So that was talking about integrity where we began this conversation. It was not full circle. It did not resonate. It was deeply disconcerting to me when I was able to get quiet and finally I was able to get sober. It took a long time. It was a very, very difficult process for me. It was not an easy decision. It was an easy decision. It was a difficult process because I had a physical dependency at that point. And
so finally, what was the breaking point or the pivot?
Full surrender. Just when I could finally admit to myself that I was an alcoholic. And that I could not drink safely ever. And I had always let myself have an out. Well, maybe one day, and I was also facing the fact that I nearly lost Sarah, who's, my heart. And so it was just this amazing, sort of grace of the universe, really, because I was also resistant to praying. I was the spiritual conversation we had in the beginning. I had inklings of those things, but I had never really landed squarely in that kind of a dialogue, internal dialogue, or even external dialogue. And so I became more open to these things, and so that it was, I think it was truly the surrender. And what's a miracle about it is that I truly one day woke up and was free. Um, and also it was also getting involved in the fellowship of the 12-step program. That was also powerful, because I was able to find real hope in it. I was able to contribute to other people's hope, because they would see me coming in and seeing me struggling, and then seeing me slowly getting it together, and that became an example for other people who were suffering similarly. And so that community was the key. Actually, I really think that it was a combination of true surrender and community. And so what happened there was, from that point, then I started really thinking about the words like integrity. What does that mean? Because that's in the literature, right? And so, what does that mean? And I was raised by a wordsmith. My dad owned a local newspaper, and so words. We do puns at the dinner table, and whoever couldn't, whoever finished the double, triple, quadruple entendre was the one who won. And these would go on for weeks and months, sometimes even years. We'd do this at holiday parties and stuff, and over dinner. And someone would bring it back around. And so looking at words and then looking at their definitions and what they really mean got me to the point where the integrity became paramount, and being integrated. And so it was also, I was struggling with this idea of how to maximize our purpose and maximize our impact with what I've learned through doing assessments for 15, 16 years. And that's what led me to be able to create the Got test kit, which we launched on gotmold.com. It took me 5 years to get the partnerships together and to get myself together and everything else. We launched about a year and a half ago. It was a huge endeavor for me. Got me outside of my comfort zone in every single way. But what also happened was I got sober on April 13th, 2018. And Sarah and I never really had planned to have kids, but we suddenly, Sarah's pregnant a month later. And I have 2 little boys. One's 2.5 and one's 4.5. And they're my sober babies. The universe gave me these incredible reinforcement tools, and gave me an ability to break a cycle that's generational for me.
Yeah, to heal,
get a little misty talking
generations, about it. Like you, to bring in ancestral healing, because
True.
you're willing and able to break the cycle. Amazing.
No doubt about it. And I really look at this as those were the gifts that were given to me to overcome, right? The boulders being rolled down the hill, the obstacle course laid out in front of me that I believe I designed. And so, now with the test kit, we're able to help people that can't afford professional testing, and it's remarkable. And, and I'm able to be present with my kids, and I operate from a place of true integrity. And, I sometimes look back and don't even recognize my previous life. It was a true sort of death and rebirth. And so it is almost impossible for me to sort of relate to that. And I have to do that daily. I have to remember that was just 6 years ago, and I have pictures actually that are amazing from a wedding that I was the best man at 7 years ago. And boy, I looked like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and I remember feeling so insecure. And what I realized was that deep insecurity, that imposter syndrome, even though I've had a few accomplishments in my life, I always felt like I was, someone was going to find me out. And I realized afterwards that what they were going to find out was that I was an addict. And that I was hiding a really big part of the most important thing for me. I was hiding from everyone who wasn't also an addict, because those are my friends. And the other thing that's been really helpful is actually finding out that, developing an incredible network of friends who have either been through it or who are, understand what's going on. And so now it's just, the life has blossomed in the most miraculous ways on the heels of those those sort of concentric circles that that came from these awakenings. And so, yeah, it's pretty hard to be sitting in this seat right now and not be like outrageously grateful.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating road, and I'm 47 now, right? And I feel like I've already lived this amazing life, and I just can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah. You're only getting warmed up.
Just getting warmed up.
Yeah. So
And I'm and more useful by the day, and I think that's the key, right?
Yeah.
How can I contribute to the greater good? And the more in tune I am, the more my contributions become a natural byproduct of just moving through the world.
How did you get to a place of peace about your mom committing suicide?
Well, actually, funny enough, when I was at the time, I told you I was a recalcitrant teenager. I was also very experimental. And at the time, I was experimenting with psychedelics quite a bit. And boy, that's in vogue now, right? But back then, I risked everything to explore consciousness and not knowing quite what I was doing. LSD and a lot of psilocybin mushrooms. Actually, there were the dominant medium, and at the time, and I quickly saw that because I was experiencing this seeing the glory and the magic of the universe and the mind, and I had a really challenging childhood, and I was actually pretty depressed as a kid. I was like, one step away from the trench coat mafia. I was a very unhappy teenager, early teens. But when she died, within 2 weeks, I had the whole thing sorted out. And it was because I had seen that she lost perspective. She couldn't see past the tip of her nose. And she didn't have the ability to zoom out and to see the magic that happens. I don't care if you look telescopically or microscopically. This is a beautiful experience. And we are stuck in this weird perspective that at this magnification, shit sucks. But every other magnification, it's beautiful to the most mind-blowing degree. I don't care if what tool you're using, microscopes or it's immense, intricate, indescribable beauty.
Yeah. And
so I had this real and fractal too, right? So it goes on, this infinite game. And so I had this realization that the beauty that what we're seeing here, we're blinded to the beauty, and so I needed to embrace that, and that began the wheels in motion on understanding, alchemy, if you will, turning lead into gold, and this idea that maybe that's the whole reason, is to be able to shift perspectives and to be able to see what isn't necessarily visible to the naked eye, which is really what LSD showed me, by the way. To see that, wow, if your senses shift, your reality shifts. At least in the moment. And so what is reality, right? And then how elastic is this stuff?
Very.
and I mean, it's a
Believing
kaleidoscope,
is seeing,
and it's
not the other way around.
Absolutely. And so I was that gift of having been in the midst of sort of, adolescent drug experimentation turns out to be a pathway to healing. And we know that now, right? Like if you told somebody that then, they would have said, whatever, pipe dreams. And now we know that these things resolve very quickly if you submit yourself, if you surrender to an experience along those lines. And so that was a big part of it. And so as a result, I went from being a depressed teenager before she died to actually becoming like an incurable optimist within weeks. It was a true shift, and I now say my mom's sisters have a really hard time when I say this, because they have not reconciled the way I have. But I often say that my mom's greatest gift to me was her suicide, and I thank her for it every day. Not to say that I wouldn't wish her back for a hug, but I wouldn't want to rewrite a single moment of my history. What she did was she gave me gifts in so many ways: her alcoholism, her suicide, her work ethic. So many great examples of who she was in the world. Her contribution to the greater good as a nurse. She ran a rehabilitation center for people with brain injuries and trauma, and she was a force. She was the most well respected person in that building. And she gave herself to a fault. So I have gratitude for every aspect of what she brought to this world, but I wouldn't have had that. I wouldn't have that view. If she were still if she were still here today, we'd probably be fighting. But because of that, she changed my world in a way where love is the dominant force, and forgiveness is the operative mechanism to get there.
That reminds me of that conversation we were having earlier in this interview about the person having the near-death experience, who moments before is looking on his phone while driving, and then next thing you know, his family has passed, unfortunately, or just the way it is. But it was all already written, and he gets to glimpse that this is a much bigger picture than he could possibly have imagined. So yeah, it's all miraculous. It's all miraculous. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how the toxic mold exposure contributed to her mental health and her choice of suicide.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really important part of the work that I do now, which is raising awareness around mold and debunking a lot of the myths around it, because most people think about mold and toxic mold as these few molds, the toxic molds, at the exclusion of the other molds that don't produce these chemicals known as mycotoxins, which are these very potent poisons that are used to inhibit growth of other microorganisms, right? So bacteria and fungi. And so these are chemical weapons that are used at a microscopic level, and we get caught in the crosshairs. But there's a misunderstanding around this, that people think that mycotoxins become easily airborne, and actually they really truly don't, except on carrier particles like spores and things like that. And so I noticed this in my early days, that there were people getting sick in buildings where there were normal spore counts, and where there was none of the toxigenic species present. And so I thought, what is going on here? Well, they all had a musty smell. All those buildings that they had what they call microbial VOCs. VOCs are often man-made chemicals, and our buildings are loaded with them. They're another conversation for a longer podcast, perhaps.
So that's
but
VOC stands for what? Volatile organic compounds.
Thank you. That's right. Thank you. Volatile organic compounds, which are chemicals that are liquid that evaporate at room temperature. So they're liquid, and that's why we keep a cap on them. Alcohol is the most famous one, the most popular one. But bleach, or the active ingredient in bleach, is also a VOC, sodium hypochlorite. Benzene, toluene, industrial solvents. These are very noxious. Many of them are carcinogens. Almost all of them cause brain fog, emotional dysregulation, cancers, of course. But brain fog and cognitive impairment are closely related to VOC exposure, especially in if you ever paint a house, if you've ever painted with VOC based paints and been in that room long enough, you get pretty loopy. And so microbes produce these too. In fact, many of the man-made VOCs are actually also produced by microbes. Mold growth is a chemical factory. That's why and our buildings are super tight these days, so they build up. We keep them tight for energy efficiency, but what we end up doing is creating these chemical boxes, these hyper concentrated chemical boxes. So the first thing that happened was the dogs are trained to sniff out the hidden mold in buildings, and they're trained to sniff out the source of those MVOCs. So we were finding hidden mold that people weren't able to find. And so when we got rid of that, the musty smell went away and people got better. This is a big deal. Spore counts are normal. There's no visible mold. We find the musty smells there. They're sick. We get rid of the mold. everything still tests well. The air count, the spore counts are normal. There's no visible mold. There's no moisture problem. People get better. So it's not the toxic. It's not the mycotoxins. It's not the specific species, right? And then in 2008, a study came out by Brown University, 6,000 participants, really big study. And they interviewed people and asked them if they had a known mold or moisture problem in their building. And then they asked them how they felt, basically a quality of life survey, And what they found was a very strong correlation between mold and dampness indoors and depression. And that was fascinating to me. Of course, I hit home and I thought, wow, I wonder what's really going on there. And of course, fatigue and difficulty concentrating and, the inability to, that's depressing. But also what they said at the end of the study was they weren't sure whether or not it was a chemical relationship between the mold and dampness and depression, or whether it was sort of circumstantial. People who are saying, I've got a mold problem, I haven't been able to fix it. I'm either I can't afford it. My husband or wife doesn't want to listen to me. My landlord won't do anything. That's a disempowering situation. And if you're disempowered for a long time, that's depressing. So there are big question marks on that. Well, I became very good friends with a woman named Dr. Joan Bennett at Rutgers University. She actually studies, she's a fungal geneticist. And she called one day after seeing an article about Oreo, my dog, and I. And she said, you have a really remarkable dog. I study mold. I'd like to meet your dog. It's okay if you come too. So we hopped in the van and we drove up to Rutgers University, just a couple exits up from Princeton where we lived at the time, and did a demonstration for her. And then she showed me her studies and told me her story. She actually had a house in New Orleans, which got flooded during Hurricane Katrina. And being a good scientist, she decided to go down and check it out. She was also a mycotoxin expert. And so she knew that it's hard to breathe in the amount of mycotoxins that cause the kind of disease that most people attribute to them. But she went in protecting herself with a respirator, an N95 respirator, which COVID taught us only takes out particles. She could smell the musty smell coming through, and it was very, very strong for her. And so she had to take a few breaks because she was feeling ill. And that really made her wonder what was going on, because here she was protecting herself from what she thought was potential source of illness. And she went back to her lab and started looking up the musty smell and found that there were very few studies on this, and meaningful studies, especially when it comes to sort of basic science and, how does it impact metabolism and, things like that. So she did this experiment using special fruit flies that actually fluoresce when they produce dopamine. It's amazing what you can buy online. And then began testing them with these compounds that comprise the musty odor. One in particular she isolated called 1-octanthiol, which is the mushroom alcohol. It's a very distinctive musty smell, or mushroomy musty smell. And so she studied with plants and also studied with these fruit flies. And she found that the fruit flies stop producing dopamine. They stop reproducing. They start flying down instead of to the light, which is their instinctive nature. They develop locomotor disorder and what she characterized as Parkinsonian-like symptoms. And later on, subsequent studies done with her students found mitochondrial damage. And so she decided that these are neurotoxic compounds and that they should actually be called volatoxins instead of microbial VOCs or MVOCs. And so you think, if an animal stops producing dopamine,